Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of TFT Hyperroll from Mission for Tuition. It's called Mission for Tuition because we are trying to raise tuition money for our son's middle and high school since he has to go to a ridiculously expensive special school. We don't ask for donations, memberships, nothing like that. It's all about views. So please like, comment, subscribe, watch the whole video. It all helps with the YouTube algorithm to get it out to more people so we can make more money for tuition. And with that said, let's get started. With a bodyguard right out of the NPC round and one already on the board, I thought this particular match might be the opportunity I've been looking for to showcase my super tank build. So the augments were interesting. I didn't get a bodyguard heart, but I saw Ascension and thought, well, if I'm going to have a really tanky build, then they're probably going to last a long time and would benefit a lot from Ascension.
I don't use Ascension a lot because later in the match, games are often quicker, and so they don't necessarily get to the full 15 seconds to get the benefit, but this is different.
So the general rules of this build for me are somewhat simple. It's get bodyguards, get enchanters, and then my goal is to make as few offensive items as possible. You're not going to be able to avoid it completely, and I did start with Ascension, so my champions are going to be getting a little extra power. We're going to be speeding through these fights because they tend to last a long time, especially with this combination. But ultimately, I'm looking to pick up tanky items, put them on tanky characters, and just outlast the competition as much as possible. This doesn't look very possible early, as I haven't been able to get an additional bodyguard heart or put that second enchanter out there. I'm up to 3 bodyguards, but that doesn't give you any special buff. You're really looking for that additional bodyguard to get to 4 or a second enchanter so that you start to get the magic resist across your team before you're going to start seeing results from this type of build. When given the opportunity to pick up an item, I'm going to choose the tanky one. Now, if you decide to do this build for yourself, I don't necessarily suggest going this wackadoodle. You probably want to create a lot more offensive items because they will be effective, but I chose to make this an additional challenge by trying to avoid them as much as possible. The Dragon's Claw does have some offense because when you get hit with a spell, you're going to do some damage back to whoever casts that spell at you. You can see this on full display here as Caitlyn is going to target Leona and ultimately use her ult against her, which is not going to have much impact, but watch her own health get knocked down simply because she ulted against Leona, and that helps the entire team overcome this team of Yordle. The augments come up and I have 2 really good choices. The first aid kit would help all my champions heal, but I cannot resist the bodyguard heart because that will immediately take me to 4, give me an additional Leona to hang out on the bench, and I'm really good to go with lots of additional armor. Unlike the Brawler Knights from last season, this build isn't as susceptible to Giant Slayer because Giant Slayer doesn't help cut through armor. It does make the damage higher on health, but it's not going to get through the amount of armor we're laying down right now. The game seems really intent on trying to make us take some offensive items, so I decide, okay, I'll grab something that's kind of offensive, but then use it in the least offensive way possible, and that is, I'm going to make Thieves' Gloves on Poppy so that Poppy can at least dodge things. Now I have my second enchanter, and my enchanter hex is in the corner, so I move everyone into the back line since they're all front line anyway. The other nice thing with this build is if Blitz wants to pull a Leona all the way across the board, you have a party with that because she's going to be able to stay up a long time even after being pulled and stunned. In that amount of time, the team is going to power up and Leona is going to manage to stay alive the whole match. When I am ultimately offered an early Orianna, I take it and decide to put a semi-offensive item on her in the Hextech Gunblade, but I'm more thinking about it in terms of healing the rest of my champions. I move her over, but now I have a nice solid 4 bodyguard, 3 enchanters so my team can stay alive longer. And again, I'm just absolutely in love with the blitz pull. Leona gets yanked all the way across the board, where she's just getting pummeled by Ezreal, by Blitz, by Ziggs, and she doesn't really care all that much. She just stands there and takes it while the rest of my team dispatches their front line and then is ultimately pulled back over to them where they finish them off. For my final augment, the game is willing to play right into my theme and give me exiles too, so my champions will be starting with a shield as long as I play the game of Tetris that keeps them all away from each other. Stuck with a bunch of items that could be used offensively, I decide to put the Thieves' Gloves onto Taric and a Redemption onto Leona and just leave the Rapid Fire Cannon for now because I don't know if I really want to use it. I'm kind of enjoying doing it this way. Again, if you decide to do this build, you don't have to go cuckoo bananas. This was my own personal challenge I decided to try out. Ultimately, since I wasn't going to get any other item components to use, I decided to go ahead, make the Rapid Fire Cannon onto Orianna, and just allow her to use it because it's not going to really add that much offense anyway. But I think Gary got a little annoyed at me for violating my own agreement with myself and made sure I lost the next round. And for those of you who hate Yordles, and I know there are a lot of you out there, I think you'll enjoy this. Watching a team of Yordles with a really, really well itemized Tristana have absolutely no impact on our team. Tristana is focused on Leona, and Leona just basically keeps shrugging off the damage over and over again until the rest of the team is able to push in and finish off those pesky Yordles. Now this team is actually running a very similar concept, only they're doing it with Brawlers and Chemtech, which is going to help with their health. Unfortunately for them, battling against this much armor and magic resist, health isn't really going to matter. And it's going to be the Ascension that is going to help my team the most, because after 15 seconds, the amount of damage we're doing is going to increase much faster than the Shrug It Off buff is helping them regenerate. And with that, we are into the top 4, and it's time to put in the final piece of this puzzle, which is Yuumi, which will allow for more shielding, more healing, and some extra CC. Now normally I would take the Banshee's Claw, but since I'm running Exiles, it's going to do pretty much no good. So I decide to go ahead and grab a blue buff, just because I can use that on Yuumi to allow her to cast earlier and thus do more healing, more CC. I'm also trading out Poppy for Braum because he is by far the better tank. And you will quickly see why I opted to go for Yuumi in the game rather than adding a 6th bodyguard. The 6th bodyguard would have taken us to another level, but the heals and the CC from Yuumi are absolutely key to keeping this team alive and kicking. The extra armor at this point really isn't going to make as much of a difference as having Yuumi just hold the other team in place while your team heals itself and ultimately outlasts them. And now I know I'm going to be in for a little bit of a struggle. This team I'm against has only lost one match the entire game. They have a very strong Seraphine, a very strong Heimer, and self-repair on their innovator little Mr. Roboto. But the game kind of becomes a little bit silly as everyone is tossing everyone and knocking everyone up pretty much everywhere. You can see it's just basically a little game of pop-up as we see who ultimately lasts longer. This round goes to me.
Why do they keep breaking?
As I mentioned in my 6 builds video, I've done this build several times, and every single time so far it has ended up resulting in a top 4. It doesn't necessarily win, but if you get the right augments, and of course the right champions and the right items, it does seem to be really, really solid in keeping your team alive for a long time, and against the right opponent, a victory. So after that, I pretty much think I've got this. I don't see any way this team can get through the amount of tank they are facing. There's just too much healing, there's too much armor, there's too much for this team to have to deal with. However, they do have a really strong team. They have a lot of scholars and a very strong Seraphine that can also keep their team healed as well, along with that Janna and everything else. So it is possible for them to ultimately outlast me and win this fight. So I let Gary know I really need some extra help here, and he says, okay, what can you do with a 2-star Yuumi? Will that extra bit of healing and that extra bit of CC make the difference and allow me to put this one away? Because we are now in sudden death. It's us or it's them. Our items aren't particularly that friendly in terms of the Thieves' Gloves, because we got items on Braum that only reach the champions next to them. And remember, we're playing Tetris. We get to see a lot of hopping and popping as everyone's getting thrown across the board. But ultimately, the healing is going to hold up, and Yuumi is going to land the perfect ult to stop their team. Seraphine is a big problem, but Leona is strong enough, and I wish I had gotten her to gold, but it didn't matter. It was more than enough to win. Hope you enjoyed the video. Again, if you decide to do this, you don't have to go crazy with it and only go defensive items. Have fun with it. Hope you have an absolutely awesome day.